Hello, everybody. What's up, Ty? Good to see you as always. We will give people a few minutes to jump in. Hey, Veronica, how you doing? Hi, Bridget. How's everything going, Bridget?
Hi, everything's fine.
Good.
Yeah.
We'll just give folks a few minutes to kind of jump in the room. You glad it's Friday?
Oh, yes.
Isn't everybody, right? It was a long week, and when it was just Tuesday. Give it just a few more minutes, then we'll go ahead and get started. Ty, what's good today? All right, we'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started.
Hey, D. Sorry about that.
That's all right. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad.
Good.
Making my way.
Nice. How's the weather in California?
Oh man, we finally got some sunshine today. I hear it's gonna. Yeah, it's supposed to, I'll tell you, this storm has been wicked. We've been spoiled for so long that I think it was our opportunity to catch up with the rest of the country during stormy seasons and such, because we
Right.
are always so spoiled. Now we're kind of going, is this what y'all experience? Okay, so all right, I got it. My bad. I'm sorry. Stop now. There's a road just up the street from my house. So right around the corner from me, there are these pretty pricey estates and such.
Mhm.
And they got flooded out. I am so glad I was not on that block. I mean,
Really?
just flooded out. The whole road washed away. So
Oh, wow.
yeah. So it was just like um and with this next storm coming around the corner, it's hard to say. But I think it's because, like in many other parts of the country, when there's no recovery time, when you don't have the ability to kind of, get your bearing and clean up what mess there was, and you just have storm after storm, it's rough. Like
Right.
normally here, we don't have, 90-mile-an-hour winds, but, for several days in a row, 85, 90-mile-an-hour winds, things like that.
Wow.
Things to where we're just not used to that level of weather in California, or at least most of California.
Right.
So,
Did I hear you guys had tornadoes?
yeah, in some parts. So
Okay.
there's a couple of cities in LA that had tornadoes that, uh, call me stupid. These things took buildings off their foundations. So it's just like, oh my God, I didn't know that happened here. It's just like, what just happened? Are you serious? Yeah, I mean, between cliff sides eroding and buildings falling, down cliffs onto the beach and such in the southern part of the state, and the tornadoes, yeah, it's been wild. It's been wild.
Wow.
So
Glad you
anyway,
guys are safe. Glad you're
yeah,
safe.
yeah, thank you for that. All right, guys, we're 5 minutes after the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. People will jump in as they jump in. As always, this is an interactive presentation, so feel free to jump in when you can. But, today, so this train up series is all about the art of the negotiation. And as all of you are aware, there are several points of negotiation that are baked into any transaction. Anytime you meet a buyer or a seller, there are multiple layers of a negotiation. you're negotiating for an appointment, you're negotiating them working with you, with the seller, you're negotiating for your fee. Soon to be buyers as well. Buyers will have to, you'll have to start negotiating with your buyer for your fee. And then of course the transactional component. So today what we're going to talk about, and I like to take things from a behavioral aspect. So today we're going to be talking about working with the buyer and what that actually means. And the reason I'm focusing on buyers today is while there are lots and lots of folks that are looking to sell their property, right now, buyers are key. They're just now poking their heads out from underneath the rocks that they retreated to, when interest rates started to rise. I was hopeful 2 days ago, I guess now, that the Feds weren't going to raise interest rates. But, to get to that 2% ceiling that they're looking at, that might be a couple of years or more than a couple of years. I don't know. But, they're trying to get down to 2% of inflation rate. I think we're at 5.5 or something like that. But that just means we'll have a few more rounds of rate hikes in order to try and get us to where we need to be. So, that being said, there's lots of buyers out there. There's still a ton of pent up demand from buyers for properties. And one of the quickest accesses that you're going to have to your customer base is those folks who've been waiting in the wings, waiting on the sidelines. Some of the things that happen when we start to see interest rates rise, you may not see it initially, but then people start, what's it called? FOMO, fear of missing out. So you've got a lot of buyers now who looked at our previous markets and they said, oh my God, I'll never get in when it's X, no matter what X is, wherever you're located. Now you've got these same buyers who've been on the sidelines for a while. They're seeing that sellers are starting to create some concessions, or at least are open to some concessions. They're seeing price points dip a bit, depending on where they are or what type of property they're looking for. So now they've got a lot of FOMO. They're now all kind of looking at that, which is, if I don't buy now, what's next? Will interest rates continue to rise? Will I truly be priced out? I know that a lot of folks in our industry believe that we were absolutely at capacity and we were maxed out and folks couldn't afford to buy. And when you talk about affordability, when you talk about it openly and agnostically, there really isn't an option to be priced out. And the reason I say that is because it's a matter of adjusting expectations. Everybody has an idea in their head of what they want. And some people are unwilling to move from that. And you see that a lot with first-time buyers. They have in their head, because there's so many home shows these days and all these things that, create a diluted home buyer. They're wanting all the amenities. I want a pool and a spa and a gourmet kitchen and a big great room and large bedrooms and all these things. And they have a price point in their head of what those things should cost, what they should be paying for that. And reality is a whole lot different. And the reason why I say that there is always something for everyone is if you think about your first anything, your first car, your first house, your first bike, whatever was a first for you that of something you really wanted, 9 times out of 10, you didn't really get the thing you absolutely wanted. You didn't get that Mercedes with the whatever it is, whatever kind of floats your boat. You got probably like I got a 76 Vega. I didn't get the car that I wanted, but I got something that was functional that got me around, and I grew to love it and utilize it in a very meaningful way before I got my next level car, which was closer to what I wanted. So thinking about it in that way, that's the same thing that's true of a home buyer. A home buyer literally is kind of resting on hopes and wishes. I hope I get this thing. I've got $400,000 to spend. I want to get this thing, and it's got to be spacious. And we know statistically that your first house is typically not your forever house. Sometimes your second house typically is not your forever house, especially with buying habits these days. most consumers hang on to a house for about 8 to 10 years. And then they, either move up, move down, move out of area. They do a lot of different things, but their first house very often is not their forever house. It's not like when their parents or grandparents purchased. Typically, parents and grandparents would pay off a mortgage. They didn't refinance, like we do in this day and age, to where we refi, either based on rate or based on pulling money out for other things that we can't necessarily afford. So when you look at that kind of behavior, it's a matter, as always, of setting this very hyper-realistic expectation of what can they truly afford and what are they willing to deal with, right? You're not going to get that ultimate thing right out of the gate. It'd be great, but that's going to cost X. So it's part of that. So that's why I say, when you talk about a qualified buyer and them being priced out of the market, it kind of feels disingenuous, because it's just a matter of an adjustment of expectation. But as you know, I'm a huge fan of quotes, because I affirm every single day for multiple reasons. It's part of quotes for me are people who have achieved a certain level of greatness that I aspire to be. And so Thomas Edison, who was a pirate and a pioneer all in the same breath, he was a brilliant man on multiple levels. Although he holds multiple patents, there are plenty of things he's done that were invented by someone else. And that's ingenuity. At the end of the day, I can appreciate something like that. But one of the best quotes, and I kind of live this every day, and I'm sure many of you do too, is our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time. And the reason why that is such a relevant thing when we're talking about negotiation, even when we're prospecting, it's a form of negotiation. We're negotiating for that meetup, or continue to talk to me, or, let's get at a little bit more of what you might be looking for. We get overwhelmed quickly. Because again, we hear no's so often, it's easy to go, just screw this. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to do something easier. I'm going to do something that doesn't require me putting out any risk. We do things like lots of mailers, or we'll do email campaigns. And I'm not saying there's not value to these things, but they're very low lift, low return opportunities. These days we leverage social media quite a bit. I think all of you know the amount of transactions that happen as a result of social media is less than 1%. I hate to break it to you, but it's just the truth. Not my stats, but real stats. And so if you're talking about having a very meaningful business in 2023, so we're just closing out first quarter of 2023, right? It's crucial that you really start to look at what your goals were for at the start of this year, either fiscal or calendar, and recognize you've got 3 quarters to do what you need to do. So there may be some adjustments that need to be made to your business strategy, and part of that is understanding, how to negotiate with the clientele that you're looking to serve. So today, what we'll really talk about is why we work with buyers, understanding the motivation of a buyer, mortgages, cash offer strategies, how to negotiate to win, tactics to move forward from contract to close. Again, some of our biggest struggles, at least this is how we feel about it, is not the deal itself, but how to get into the deal. But I say they're all interconnected, okay? So again, if you look at yourself as the purveyor of the information, the keeper of the currency, which is data, then you're going to start to have more and more wins as you're looking for buyers who are ready, willing, and able to make the deal happen. Okay. So I'm sure all of you have had an opportunity to see what this meme is based on, which is one of my favorite movies, which was Jerry Maguire. Reason being, Jerry Maguire was a movie. Yes, it had an underpinning of a love story, but it was all about, negotiating effectively and what we do to negotiate and sometimes win the deal. And, yes, there were lots of moments of sleaziness and such, but at the end of the day, it is all about data, right? It's show me what the truth is. We work with folks who experience a tremendous amount of noise. news programs, sound bites, little blips in periodicals that are not necessarily accurate or reliable. We know that there's a lag to all of the data that comes out in the consumer space. Ty said yesterday, the minute you hear it in, I hope I don't butcher it, the minute you hear it on the street, it's already too late, essentially was what the quote was. And that's very true. The minute these buyers are hearing this data, now they're already started to panic. That moment's already gone. It's been gone for a while. They're just now hearing it. It's like a light year or a ripple in a lake. You know, it already happened, 5 minutes ago, but you're just now seeing the effects of what that was. Okay. So what is our why when we're working everywhere? I know you guys are conditioned right now to think the market just sucks, but I'm going to ask this of all of you. Are there people transacting real estate today? Today is the 24th of March. Is there anybody who's transacting real estate today? Not just you, but anybody around you. I think all of you,
yes.
Go ahead. Yes, right? Mm-hmm. A resounding yes. There are people who transact real estate every single day, and there are people working with buyers right now at this very moment that we're kind of discussing it. So they are everywhere. It's a matter of, kind of identifying actually what is a buyer. There are a lot of people who will talk to you because they just want to know, they're curious about stuff, but have no intent or ability to buy. So what is a buyer? A buyer is someone looking to experience property ownership. Again, lots of folks who are looking to do that, but are they serious? Have they taken steps to actually get to that position? First-time home buyers make up 34% of all homes that are sold. So that's a staggering number. That's a third of every house that's sold is a first-time person. But again, we talk a lot about overcoming fear or working through fear energy. There's so much uncertainty, particularly in an environmental state like now. We've got interest rates that are rising. We've got looming wars with mega countries. We got all kinds of things that are shaking consumer confidence on some level. But then you have folks who, kind of push through. The reality is those things are going to happen whether there's a home in your future or not, right? Whether you're the owner or whether you're still the renter. At the end of the day, you have to live somewhere. And that's the truth of it, whether you're renting or buying. And like we all like to say, good to rather own than rent, right? That's kind of a good rule of thumb. The typical first-time home buyer these days is about 33 years old. So if you're significantly above that, yes, join the club. You are old. I am old. It's a new generation that's buying, and they have different buying habits. They have different ways of looking at the market. They have a different way of looking at money. I know a lot of Gen Xers and a lot of millennials feel that their legacies were stolen by a baby boomer like myself. And, the truth is they feel like jobs are not as plentiful as, during the baby boomer era. There's no retirement funds for them. A lot of this is nonsense. I believe that a lot of it is relevant. I hear the voices and, can agree with some. But they're now just starting to realize the opportunities that exist. Interest rates, guys, even at 7%, I just got to tell you, still super low. Ask yourselves if you've got a loan on anything other than a house, or if you've got credit cards that you utilize on a regular basis. Are your credit cards at 7%? Holy no, of course not, right? Your credit cards are 15% and above, in more cases, probably 20%, just depending, right? Credit cards know how to make their money, and they're making their money. So you've got other things that we pay much more in interest, and we're willing to let those things ride in some cases, right? Some of you have balances on your credit cards. The interest alone is probably more than what you would if you paid the thing off. So younger buyers have a more they don't always see the opportunities. They don't always see it as fluid. They think there are many barriers, and that's some of the noise that I was sharing with you earlier that they experience. So typical home buyers, 33 years old. The typical repeat age for a repeat buyer rose to 56 years old. which is, I mean, if you think about it, again, we don't always get the thing we want at first. The reality is the average income for a 33-year-old is around $50,000. I mean, that's a good bit of money. We don't see it. A lot of times we're very jaded. We think young people think that they should be making $100,000 or $200,000 right out of the gate. It took me quite a bit of time to get to that threshold, right? So it's a gradual buildup, just like purchasing a home. So the average repeat buyers around 56. 14% of homeowners in 2021 were U.S. veterans. So again, you've got a lot of folks in the buying segment that we may not be looking at or maybe overlooking because we're focused on either we've set our price point at a certain dollar range, so we're only working with a certain type of buyer. But these are real opportunities. When you start to think about how you're working your customer base or how you're prospecting, start to really evaluate who is it that you're prospecting and where do you think you can find the most success to get into a deal today, to get into a deal right now. And sometimes these groups are overlooked. 11% of home buyers purchased a multi-generational home to take care of aging parents. That could be me next year. Who knows, right? It's a combined income, particularly with some of the economic factors, that a larger rise in multi-generational families. Parents, grandparents, children, grandchildren, all living under the same roof. A collective share of expenses, pooling of income resources, things like that. So again, these are all opportunities that may be overlooked by you as you're starting to look at your buyer pool. If you can start to think about steering away, if you're really leveraging internet leads, thinking about the cost of what some of those things are. Certainly, we all look to tighten our belt when there's a lack of economic resources or when there's a change in economic functioning. Some of those ways are to look at what you're spending on internet leads, which are really passive ways of prospecting. Guys, look at the return on your average internet lead. And I'll stop for a second. How many of you are leveraging internet leads, and what's your return on those internet leads? Anybody leveraging them?
So, D, this is Ty. So, I actually, I've been getting internet leads for a while.
Okay.
But I will say to your point that the return on investment is relatively low. But again, I'm not paying a tremendous amount for leads. So, anything that does come across my desk and we are able to put a transaction in place, I mean, it really covers my cost basis for the entire year.
Oh, that's stellar.
Right.
Let me ask you this, Ty. So that's not your only strategy, though, right?
Correct.
Absolutely. Correct. I mean, that's one of the key things, right? Is making sure that it's not your only strategy or your primary strategy. Again, it's that whole dreaded rejection thing. We'll make that internet thing our pride. I know agents who are spending thousands of dollars per month on internet leads. And yes, some of those things will pay off. It's just the law of average. But, is it enough to really justify thousands of dollars a month, equating to hundreds of thousands of dollars annually on these internet leads? It's a really low margin of return. So thanks for that, Tom. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about buyer motivation. So anybody, what is the biggest obstacle to home ownership?
Affordability.
Affordability. What's another way to translate that? What's another way to state that? What's the caption next to it? What's the picture that's scrolling?
Money.
Money. Absolutely. That's the biggest obstacle to home ownership. Most people don't actually think that they can afford it. They don't, we've been given this narrative that we've lived under for decades now. And while it is the old 20%er, right? Lender's not going to take the whole haircut. Lender's like, yeah, I'll throw in the biggest pot, but you got to come in with me, right? You're going to share in this haircut. So do you have 20%? I'm willing to give you 80. You got 20. Well, there are all kinds of ways to get to 100% financing. Certainly, we know with military financing, it's no money down, no closing costs, VA no-nos, right? There are other ways too. FHA is 3% down. FHA also has a 1% program. Now, granted, you have to qualify. Typically, I only see it in new builds, but they have a 1%. There you can do a 10%. Now a lot of us try and avoid PMI, or we talk to our buyers about PMI, the private mortgage insurance, which lasts for the lifetime of the loan until they refinance out of it. But financing, and again, most people from a negotiating standpoint don't understand financing, right? That's why agents are so willing to accept the objection of, they don't have any money. They want to save for a bit. He's supposed to get a raise next year. They want to wait. It's all about financing. It's all about money. That's a convenient hurdle. And I submit that hurdle 9 times out of 10 can be removed. A, an adjustment of expectation, and B, a really careful survey of financing. Even folks with bad credit can buy, and bad credit is stated as anything around 580. Anything below that, you're probably not going to even be looked at. But 580 is a threshold for some lenders. Typically 660 is a threshold that most lenders can work with, provided that there's sufficient income and the DTI is not too high. But financing, big issue. So 87% of buyers finance their home purchase. So even in our all cash era, while it looked as though every home sold was all cash, that was kind of an illusion. And that was another thing that kept buyers on the sideline. They assumed that their loan wasn't going to be competitive. And realtors bought into that narrative. And I'm not saying that there weren't actual cases to where that happened, but there was lots of financing going on during the banner year of 2021. Lots of financing. As we are the keeper of that data, right? It is that thing of really educating a buyer. I know you're hearing these things, but it's just not true, right? People get a loan every day, all day, because most of us don't make life decisions in big chunks. We don't go out and plop $1 million down on the thing that we want. We look at bite-sized pieces of that $1 million translates to $3,500 a month or whatever that number looks like, where I can actually manage that thing. 61% of down payment comes from savings. So people do save. Again, not necessarily the 20%. And it all depends on the markets we work and, what that 20% represents. Now, certainly in states like California, Florida, Texas, in some respects, to where, you have average price points that are around $1 million, 20% is $200,000. That's still a boatload of money. That's that's a lot of savings to be had. So sometimes savings are pooled. 50% of buyers use proceeds from the sale of a previous home, because again, their equity positions are high. They're able to leverage that money into something else. What constitutes a first-time home buyer, by the way, guys? Does everybody know? Anybody know? So a first-time home buyer is someone who hasn't purchased a house in the last 36 months, so 3 years under FHA, things like that. So, if you bought a house, you can buy another house as a first time, and you don't have ownership. You can buy a house as a first-time home buyer after 36 months. 28% of first-time buyers used gift money as a source of down payment. So parents, grandparents, things like that. And then talking about the cash offer phenomenon. So the National Association of Realtors found that 14% of all buyers purchased their home with all cash. Now, remember, it looks like, in that last market that everybody was buying all cash. And certainly in super hot markets where people had a lot of liquidity, there was lots of cash being traded. But again, there were homes being sold every day that weren't cash, that were financed. So what is a cash offer really? A cash offer is an all-cash bid without any upfront financing. Some of that is illusionary. It's where folks either borrowed against a stock portfolio, a 401k, life insurance policy, something like that. They borrowed money They leveraged money out of some other asset or some other portfolio to give the illusion of cash, to where they didn't have to come up with any money up front, but then they financed or refinanced the purchase on the back end once they were actually able to secure the win. Again, feels more attractive to sellers. I've always gone with this, and it all depends on how you negotiate with your counterpart agent and how they negotiate with the seller. But isn't it at the end of the day, everything is all cash to a seller, right? Whether you're financing or coming up with the money out of your own pocket, it's all cash. Either way, it's cash at the end of the day for the seller. So sometimes it's always a bit, there's some advantages, speed, right? With an all cash offer, you're not going through a lender, so there's no delays. So you're actually able to facilitate the close of the deal much quicker, things like that. So there's an advantage to that. On average, a mortgage loan takes about 39 days to close in some of the markets that we're in right now. You had lenders in the previous market that were able to close 10, 15 days, things like that. But again, you're starting to see some folks who are having buyer's remorse a year or in some cases 2 years later because they feel they overpaid. But again, what creates value? What you're willing to pay and what somebody's willing to accept. With an all-cash offer, there are fewer contingencies. There's no loan or appraisal contingency. So it seems like the deal will go through much more efficiently. Typically, they were still hanging on to at least some form of inspection contingency, but the deal usually closes much more quickly. Loan and appraisal are usually absent. Simpler closing process, fewer documents to sign, things like that. So is there any advantage to a loan? Again, talking about negotiation, and as you're looking at working with your buyers and being the keepers of the data, is there any advantages to of having a loan versus a cash offer? I know we just went through a few, but let's look at it this way. Loan is leveraged funds that can be an advantage to a buyer for sure, because it's money that is, titrated over time. You didn't have to come up with $1 million all up front or 500,000 or 200,000 all up front. It's leveraged money. Leveraged money creates huge opportunities, right? Particularly as you look at equity and appreciation of a property. Typically, in a typical market, a home appreciates anywhere between 2 and 5% per annum. So, using those numbers, and again, as you're looking at the appreciation and you didn't have to come up with $1 million up front, in 5 years' time, you could have amassed a nice little return on your housing investment and buy up, get closer to buying the thing that you actually want. Historically low interest rates. Now, of course, interest rates have come up, but 5, 6, 7% are not ugly interest rates. They're different than the 3, but and Ty knows this. At 3%, we were touching LIBOR rates. I mean, 3% is any lower, any lower, we're starting to crash the economy. So I mean, it wasn't sustainable, even though people thought it was because of the time it's been. But we had gone through a world lockdown. People were scrambling to make sure that we still had an economy. We were looking at collapses of buildings, of industry, large and small. So we had to maintain that interest rate for a period of time because the world shut down for about 2 years, and that's an unusual thing. Loans help you to establish credit, particularly something like a mortgage. A mortgage is an installment loan. In other words, it's not like a revolving loan, like a credit card, where your balance changes here and there. In an installment loan, you're paying an equal amount of interest and principal over time, to where at the end there's a zero balance, right? So installment loans look really good to creditors because it's showing your credit worthiness. You're paying this chunk of money on time over a period of time. It really skyrockets you from a credit perspective. Contingencies like loan and appraisal protect the buyer who's already nervous, right? That, if you're talking about information we're sharing from a negotiation standpoint, acknowledge right up front, hey, I get it. You're nervous. You're concerned about whether or not this thing is actually going to do what you hope it does for you. You know, that's why a loan is valuable. That's why it's important to get them in front of a lender up front, so that all of these fears can be allayed and that the buyer feels confident moving forward. Again, we talked about credit. An advantage of cash, besides the obvious, it gives the seller confidence that the offer is going to close because there's real money on the table, or at least immediate money, shall I say. It can close much more quickly. It doesn't affect your credit, so there's not an advantage on that, right? Cash doesn't really touch creditors. You can say, I bought this all cash, great, but what does that mean? What's your real money management skill? That's what a loan does for you. It really kind of speaks loudly to your money management skills. Long-term financial savings with the absence of interest. So you're not paying interest with cash. You paid its true value, whereas with a loan over time, you're going to pay probably close to a third of the value of the home in some cases in interest over that 30-year period of time. But again, if you think about the fact that most homes are not people's forever homes, it turns out to be relatively negligible in that sense. Minimal paperwork with a cash offer. It makes it a lot easier, a lot quicker to close. Okay. So traditional loans versus cash offer, what are the downsides? What are the negatives? With a loan, lots of qualifying data to satisfy the lender, income, debt to income ratio. Again, you've got interest that's associated with that loan over time. You're less competitive in an active market. Additional inspections may be required by the lender, in addition to things like rather than a general title policy, you're getting an extended title policy to cover things like zoning or surveys, things like that. Longer time to close due to the approval process. So, all those things that we know about a loan reign true, but I still think the pros outweigh the cons, in my opinion. With cash, the buyer requires a lot of liquidity to facilitate, and particularly in these high value, high dollar markets, I can tell you right now, all of you with confidence, I don't have $1 million laying around, so in an all cash fashion. Unable to take advantage of taxes when we're paying cash. So we get right away on that cash payout of a house. Cash is tied up for the foreseeable future. You're unable to leverage that liquidity that you once had. That's why leveraging money is a brilliant strategy, because you're not tying up your cash for just one thing. All right. So we obviously Radius has some cash offer strategies. I won't get into that right now, but there are all kinds of cash offer strategies that will allow it to look as though you're putting all cash, when in reality, you're actually if you've got a home to sell, you're kind of leveraging the home that you have for sale in advance so that you can buy before you sell, that kind of thing. And I'll get into that in another session. We won't do this today. So that's cash offer. And we work with a couple of companies, Fly Homes, Zoom Casa, that actually can facilitate these things. People borrow against their stock portfolios, or they leverage their 401k. I don't know how much of a fan I am of leveraging your 401k. If you know that you can repay it quickly, there's an advantage to that, but sometimes there's not. And the whole reason you have a 401k is you're deferring, the tax experience. So, all right. So the negotiating part. So how do we negotiate to win? How do we negotiate with our buyer for our buyers to move forward with us, but for B, to where the folks that we are working with will start to experience success on a more even playing field? So one, which is, and I've said this a million times, get the listing agent on your side. Guys, we are allies with our real estate brethren. Whether you're a listing agent or you're working with a buyer, You both have the same goal in mind. My buyer wants to buy, your seller wants to sell, or vice versa. All we're doing is just getting together and kind of figuring out what everybody wants to do so that there's a win-win at the end of the day. So aligning with the listing agent's never a bad thing. I know out here in California, and I'm sure Giro's experienced this as well, sometimes these agents get so combative and so adversarial, and by the end of the transaction, they hate each other. They're just, oh my God, this person was a so-and-so and did these things, and I think they were XYZ, which is ridiculous. This person's on your side, and it should always be that. So sometimes just calling the listing agents, particularly in when we were having a competitive market, and just going, God, I'm sure you're just bombarded. Lots of they're being dumped on, and they're overwhelmed and frustrated. And in a competitive market, absolutely align with them. If they're doing an open house, bring them water or a burger. I've done all kinds of silly things like that, just because you know what their day goes like if you yourself been on that side of the fence. In a non-competitive market, kind of talk about some of the things they're experiencing. You don't have to go right necessarily into the minutia of the deal and what will your seller do and all that. Get to know the person, get to know that agent, align with them as a human being and a colleague. And that goes a long way because you've created a relationship just like you created that relationship with your buyer, or if you're the listing agent, with your seller. You want to do the same parallel process with the agents that you're working with. Relationships are a natural component of the negotiation. If you understand that every transaction is a win-win, that's going to be your first and foremost. As a matter of fact, if you're not networking every week, you are killing yourself right now. Networking is everything in this business. I know a lot of agents who don't understand the value of working with other agents. They're like, why am I going to go to that? It's a bunch of agents. There's no clients there. You're short-sighted. And again, just my opinion, but I feel those people are very short-sighted when they can only see the fact of there is no clients to be had from a networking event or from an industry function. And I couldn't say any louder. The opposite is true, at least in my experience. I've made some great relationships, gotten deals out of the blue because I made those great relationships, and it was from people who weren't in my immediate area or recognized the value and realized I had some expertise that maybe they didn't, or vice versa. So, again, every transaction should be a win-win. So always build relationships with, whether you're the listing agent, the buyer's agent, with the people around you. But since we're talking about buyers, with the listing agent. Again, commiserating with the agent, recognizing their pain points. I get it. People are dumping on you. Your seller may be a little difficult, all these things, because we've all been there, So again, aligning with their pain, they're going to align with you. How can I help you get there? A true story. When I bought my house that I'm in right now, it had everything I wanted. Literally, I saw this house at 5:30 in the morning. I jumped in the car. My wife's like, where are you going? Can I go? I drove over here, and there were already cars in the driveway, and it needed a lockbox code. And I just knew, fortunately it was vacant, so you had people walking in and around. But, I had a simple conversation with the agents. I called her up and I said, oh my God, you got a lot of people here. This thing is going to go quick, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, I know, we're hoping, blah, blah, blah. And there were offers that were sky high, just crazy money. And the one thing I talked to her about, to where she recognized that I knew the business, or at least she could appreciate that I was in the business, was the fact of, since there weren't a ton of cash things, I was like, it's got to appraise at the end of the day. I'm going to come in higher than what you're asking, but we both know we want it to close. Simple conversations. We talked a few industry standards, which obviously I'm in the house. So clear to say that I won the deal, but it was just me aligning with her a bit, telling her she had a bunch of people out here telling just the truth, giving her straight facts. And, it was a good deal at the end of the day. It's okay to ask. Let me rephrase this. So asking the true motivation of a seller is an ethics violation. So let me qualify what I mean here is, as you're talking about as you're talking with that listing agent, just kind of finding out more specifically, what can my buyer do or offer to your seller that would make it more favorable or closer to what they need. That's what I mean by true motivation. You actually can't ask true motivation because it's a violation of your fiduciary relationship. If you're the listing agent going, well, the seller's moving to Idaho and they got to get rid of this property quickly. You've just now disclosed confidential information. But if you can, ask what the buyer can do to assist your seller to get to their goal, then, absolutely. That's what I meant by true motivation. Before you guys start yelling at me going, you can't do that. Okay. It's important for you when you're talking about negotiating to win. It's important for you to understand the market yourself. Sad but true, guys, and I think you can admit this. Sometimes as agents, we don't research in the way that we should. So we don't understand what's going on in the neighborhood or the community where we're looking to allow our buyer to have a win. You've got to know what's going on in the market. You got to know the proximity to schools and what those schools are doing. Is the neighborhood in decline, or is it a neighborhood that's either stabilized or moving up? Are there new things going on in the community, like new shopping centers or widening of roads or anything like that will enhance or embellish the community in which they're looking to buy? So I think you guys see where I'm going with that. You got to make sure that you are on point with everything that you're talking about. What's sold. And these are, by the way, these are just stating simple facts. I know that, a house just 4 doors away, about the same size and floor plan of this house, sold for X. Does your seller really want that? Help me understand why they're trying to get $50,000 more when the same thing just sold last month for less, right? Principle of substitution. So is the home price based on fact, or it's just the seller's whim? We all know sellers are really good at that. And we as agents, sometimes we're afraid to give pushback to the seller because we think the seller's not going to like us. So they're going to want to fire us and go with another agent, right? It's just a principle of business. We are the experts and we represent ourselves as the expert. I mean, how many of you go to your doctor, your physician, and your physician says, hey, you need to quit smoking because it's causing you, all these health problems for you. And you're like, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been smoking for years. None of those health things are going to happen to me. None of us. We stopped smoking because our doctor told us to if we want to continue to live, right? So represent yourself as the industry expert. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'd love to get you X more for the property. This is also how I make my living. But the reality is do we want to be a market reject? Do we want to just sit here because we're priced higher than anything else in the neighborhood that looks just like this? And again, that's sometimes a difficult conversation, but if it's presented in the correct manner, your seller will pick up on it very quickly. Explain to the buyer their own responsibilities in this. I mean, all of us have had uncooperative buyers for whatever reason. They'll dig their heels in the sand and tell you you're not doing a good job because you're not, working in their best interest if you don't try and get them the lowest rate and all that kind of thing. The truth is sometimes we have to understand it's competitive. There are other people who want this thing just like they want this thing. And while we're not trying to get them to break the bank or go beyond their comfort level or do something that they patently don't agree with, we want to prep them in advance. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I know we're going to do our best to try and get you the lowest price and keep as much money in your pocket. But the truth is, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, there's a lot of people out there looking in this neighborhood. And I just want to prepare you for that. We need to put our best foot forward always. I will absolutely negotiate in the best way I can for you to be successful. But there are going to be other people doing the same. And get the buy-in for that. That way they can play along with the process as well. You've got to understand your purpose. Who are you in the transaction? And what do you bring to the table? And how are you interacting with both the listing agent and their seller and your buyer? You've got to understand what your place is, right? You might not win the first time. It may take 2 or 3 tries as you're out there looking at properties. And again, letting the buyer know these things up front goes an awful long way into the buyer recognizing you as a professional who's doing their job and in terms of maintaining their expectation of the process. Okay. In a competitive market, you're going to offer above list price. And even in a normal market or a neutral market, I submit that you should also let your buyer know that the possibility of offering more money than what the listing price is might be the case. Reason I say that is twofold. One, which is there are agents who are notorious for pricing properties undervalued. I'm going to use a word, and it's a colorful word, but it just pisses me off when that happens. It's one thing to offer slightly below as a variable, right? And in some markets, they have what's called range pricing. But, I can see you offering potentially 0.5% to 1% lower than what the market may accept or may support. Something like that. That's a variable, and it allows you to capture a wider audience and still meet your seller's threshold. I see agents pricing homes significantly under market so that you've got this feeding frenzy of folks with the hopes of getting into something, and they're seeing this tremendous value when consumers are also doing their homework just like you, and they're going, oh my God, I can get this neighborhood and this house for this. Let's go do it. That's not going to happen. It's ridiculous. So that's why I'm saying be prepared. Prepare your buyer for the inevitable event that they may be bidding on a property that might have multiple people bidding on it, and they may have to go above what the list price is. And, finally, let them know about sticker shock. Guys, sticker shock is a real thing. If you've been looking to buy a house for 5 years, part of your thinking, part of your brain mapping is 5 years ago. So, or if you just moved to an area and you come from an area that's the average home price is $300,000 and you get into a $700,000 average market, oh my God, you're talking about your brain is broke. You were like, oh my God, I'll never get here. And people get physically upset, cry, and they go through real loss in those scenarios. So definitely establish your buyer's responsibilities. Okay. Again, you're not always offering above the list price, but for every offer that the listing agent has in hand, you want to look at 1% above the list price. So if they have 5 offers, you're looking at 5% above list price if you're wanting to be successful in the negotiation. Understand the buyer's budget right up front. You've got to really draw hard numbers so that you know what you're working with, so that you don't ever exceed what the buyer's true capacity is. You've got to create headroom. So if your buyer's at 500,000, you're going to look at properties that are 400,000. You're not going to start at the cap. You're going to look at $350,000, $400,000 and work up so that there's headroom. Every listing is different, right? Again, don't fall for those below market strategies. Those things just drive me crazy. And, it's amazing that in 2023, agents are still kind of doing nonsense like that, particularly with all the online valuation tools that would absolutely say differently. Understand what your offer terms need to look like. Don't remove contingencies completely, but adjust timeframes, particularly if you know that you and your buyer can act quickly. I'm not a huge fan of removing, for states that have contingencies, I'm not a huge fan of removing those right up front. It literally puts risk on your buyer's plate almost immediately. So be mindful of those things. And, again, never go above what your buyer's truly comfortable with. Truly comfortable with, not, I don't want to spend that much, but beyond their cap. And determine right up front, what are the deal breakers for your buyer? Have that discussion long before you ever see property one. What are the things you have to have? What are the things you can live without? What neighborhood amenities or community amenities are a must, or what neighborhood features would be a deal breaker? Okay, so determine those things up front. You don't want to go in blindly, like all of a sudden you put in an offer and your buyer's like, "Ooh, but it's next to this thing. No, let's retract." You don't want to do that. Okay. all the standards. I'm going to go through these quickly because these are things that we all know. But being prepared is everything, right? Be ready to offer. Be ready to offer. Again, if you've done all the pre-work with your buyer, and again, this is part of good relationship development, they're going to know all these things. They're going to have 3% as a good faith deposit, and help them to understand what that actually means. That it's just Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I love your house so much, I am willing to put money up front to show you how serious I am. That's really all it is, right? If you're doing a loan or if you're cash, show proof of funds. Show where that money's coming from and that the buyer actually does have these things and are able to pull the trigger. If they're getting a loan, try and get a full documentation pre-approval prior to going out to the house. There's sometimes some conditions that can't be met in advance, but do as much strong legwork as possible. Try not to ask for a lot of repairs. On every real estate contract, all properties are sold in their as-is present physical condition, which means as the house sits as you see it today, this is what you're buying. You do understand that, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I know agents who right up front go, oh, we'll just ask the seller for this and this and this and this and this. That really becomes problematic. And I'm not saying to not do that or to not ask for things, but the truth is advise your buyer, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, this 30-year-old house, I don't believe they've changed out the heater or the AC or the windows or anything like that. So there may be things just as a house ages that might need to be corrected. Are you okay with that? And that's a realistic conversation. It absolutely manages the expectation, almost immediately. If you're going in and telling them, oh, the house is going to be built, you're going to love this, blah, blah, blah. Carpet and paint don't always solve every issue, okay? Again, as I talked about knowing your business, really know your business. I know there's a lot of calculators and things out there. Guys, one of my favorite is Carl's Mortgage Calculator. It's available for both Android and iOS. I've used this thing for better than a decade, since 2008. So it's been around a long time. It's free. I absolutely love it. You can send reports to your buyers based on their amortization schedule. I love this thing. So use it still to this very day. All right.
We've thought about it. We've prayed about it. This is our dream home. So
we're not going to have time to watch this. We're actually at time. I'll play this again at another day, but this is a comedian who actually does this take on, when we're working with buyers. This is absolutely hilarious. It's a very funny skit, but it's something that I'll cover next time. All right, guys, any questions on what we've covered? Does anybody have anything that they want to add? Opening up the floor for questions. All right. Well,
good stuff, D. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jiro. As always, guys, I really appreciate your time and participation. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you've got questions, and I'll see you all next time. Have a fantastic weekend.
You too. See ya.
Take care, dude.
Thanks, buddy.